Now we can all get our Nielsen ratings and see, are we doing better than the top rated shows on cable?
Yeah. Okay, so I'll admit everyone in the meeting. All right, so hello to everyone and welcome to this special edition of the UFMG Constitutionalism and Democracy Seminar Series. The seminars are an initiative of the Graduate Program in Law of the Federal University of Minas Gerais, Brazil, and the Digital Council UFMG Content Governance Research with the support of the UFMG Study Center on Transitional Justice, UFMG GNet Research Group, UFMG Center on Transnational and Comparative Juridical Studies, the Iconnest Chapter Brazil, the Graduate Program in Law of the Federal University of the Semi-Arid, the Graduate Program in Law of the Federal University of Uberlândia, the University of Brasília, and the Brazilian Association of Political Philosophy and Constitutional Law. The seminar series on constitutionalism and democracy aim to create an online forum of topical, vivid, and interactive academic debate. This series of events provide opportunity for distinguished, emerging, and early career scholars to discuss the main concerns and challenges affecting the current constitutional jurisdictions around the world from the perspective of comparative constitutional analysis. We would like to thank our team, Ulisses, Ana Luisa, Bruno, and Natasha, for helping us in organizing the series. The videos of the seminar series will be available on YouTube, and we are recording this panel. If you disagree with that, please turn off your cameras. We would like to thank such distinguished scholars to join us in debating those just released books. It is an immense honor for all of us. To act as a moderator this time, we are pleased to receive Professor Johanna Fröhlich, Assistant Professor of the Pontifical University Catholic of Chile. Johanna, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Emilio. I am very honored and really excited to be in such an excellent company and promoting a dialogue about topics of great relevance, I guess, for everyone who is interested in public law and comparative constitutional law. So recently, two important books on the emergence of illiberalism and the decline of constitutional democracy, one from Brazil and the other one from Hungary and Poland, were launched. Emilio Meyer's book is in an in-depth account of the dramatic erosion of constitutional democracy in Brazil, while Tímea, Drinóczi, and Agnieska Bien-Kacála give a powerful analysis of illiberal constitutionalism. The authors raise controversial issues and challenge our current understanding of these terms, such as constitutionalism and democracy, their emergence, distorted variations, and eventual collapse. Today, we have three outstanding professors of comparative constitutional law as discussants who are going to comment and share their thoughts on these two books. Let me start by introducing them first. Antonia Baraggia is an associate professor of comparative constitutional law at the University of Milan Law School, Italy. She is a principal investigator of the project Confederal on Fiscal Federalism and Social Rights, awarded by Cariplo Foundation. She has been visiting fellow at the Fordham University Law School and at the Institute of Federalism of University of Freiburg. She holds a PhD in public law from the University of Turin. She serves as one of the members of the executive board of the Younger Comparativist Committee and the American Society of Comparative Law. Her research interests include the role of courts, economic and financial crisis, socioeconomic rights, fiscal federalism considered in a comparative perspective. She authored 3 books and several publications in Italian and in English on the effects of financial crisis on national constitutional systems and on the European Union, economic conditionality on fundamental rights protection in comparative perspective, and on the dialogue among courts. Our other discussant is Professor Mark Graber, Regent Professor at the University of Maryland. Professor Graber held a faculty position in the Department of Government and Politics at the University of Maryland, College Park, until 2007. In 2004, he was appointed Professor of Government and Law at the School of Law, a title he held until 2015, at which time he received an appointment as Jacob A. Franz Professor of Constitutionalism. In 2016, he was named Regent Professor. He served as an Associate Dean for Research and Faculty Development until 2013. He has also been one of the organizers of the annual Constitutional Law Schmooze. Great name chosen for such an interesting forum, which attracts scholars from across the country to the law school. Professor Graber is recognized as one of the leading scholars in the United States on constitutional law and politics. He's the author of A New Introduction to American Constitutionalism by Oxford University Press, a co-author of American Constitutionalism, Structures and Powers, and American Constitutionalism, Rights and Powers, both from Oxford University Press. And finally, I would like to welcome our third discussant, Professor Tom Ginsburg, a Leo-Spitz Professor of International Law, Ludwig and Hilde Wolf Research Scholar, Professor of Political Science at the University of Chicago. Tom Ginsburg focuses on comparative and international law from an interdisciplinary perspective. He holds a BA, a JD, and a PhD degrees from the University of California at Berkeley. His latest books, How to Save a Constitutional Democracy, was written with Aziz Haq, and his earlier books include Judicial Review in New Democracies, which won the C. Herman Pritchett Award from the American Political Science Association, and The Endurance of National Constitutions, which also won a Best Book Prize from the same association. He's currently co-directs the Comparative Constitutions Project as an effort founded by the National Science Foundation to gather and analyze the constitutions of all independent nation states since 1789. Before entering law teaching, he served as a legal advisor at the Iran-US Claim Tribunal, The Hague, Netherlands, and he continues to work with numerous international development agencies and foreign governments on legal and constitutional reform. He is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. So welcome, all of you. I would like to share very quickly the format of our event today. First, the authors of the two books that we are going to discuss here today are going to introduce their books in 6-7 minutes. Then we are going to have 4 rounds of questions grouped around 4 topics. First, we are going to talk a little bit about the terminology and its challenges, then the causal explanatory variables that led the authors to conclude to their conclusions. We are going to talk a little bit about the contagious nature of populist politics and authoritarian practices. And finally, we are going to talk about how or what type of remedies can we point at as members of the academic community to support constitutionalism and democracy in our countries. And that is going to be followed by a Q&A section as well. So please, for the Q&A section, use the chat function of the Zoom. I and my colleagues are going to be reviewing this, and when we get to the Q&A section, I am going to put the questions forward to our discussants. Right, so the first book that we are going to discuss today is titled Constitutional Erosion in Brazil, written by Emilio Meyer, a professor of constitutional law at the Federal University of Minas Gerais, Brazil, and research fellow of the Brazilian National Council for Scientific and Technological Development. Please, Emilio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Johanna. Thank you to you all to join us today. I will try to do a small presentation of the book, trying to connect with all the questions that were elaborated in order to organize this launch. But if something is not covered here, I think that through the Q&A and the discussions, I can clarify some of the questions. So let me just start by the start. The book I wrote is entitled Constitutional Erosion in Brazil, and of course presupposes some important definitions that are made in the introduction. So I think that concerning the terminology, some of the things that I try to do is to, first of all, do not create another concept or another subject in the midst of the several ones that were created in the past few years to try to show or to frame what's going on in the different contexts that we study and that face situations of democratic erosion. So what I did is, first of all, try to show that there is a specific way to describe what is a constitutional crisis. And a constitutional crisis is a very important situation in which institutions do not comply with the functions constitutions set to them. And in not doing so, we will have a situation in which we can have constitutional crisis. So what is defined by constitutional crisis is more akin to what Professors Ginsburg and Professor Aziz Hook defined it as situations of collapse of democracies. This is very important for us in this study because since it is a case study of Brazil, we have some exercise of comparative constitutional law, of course, in the book, but the main case is Brazil, and my effort was to try to show that Brazil is not facing or it didn't face in the past few years what could be described as constitutional crisis. Instead, what we had is a sequence of different political crises, or some of them are not distinguishable from each other. And those political crises, they are more akin to what Hook and Ginsburg describe as processes of erosion. So processes that are detrimental, that are slow, that goes in the sense of the metaphor of the slow cooking of a frog, and that can, in the end, result, and that is mainly part of the conclusion of the book, that if we do not take care of constitutional erosion, it can end on democratic collapse or constitutional collapse or in a constitutional crisis. So the introduction of the book is the main part in which I try to develop those concepts. And of course, the main concept here is constitutional erosion. What is the difference between the ideas that are defended by Professors Hook and Ginsburg and what I try to do in the book? I tried to create, I'm not sure if I was successful, an idea that could travel a little bit more. I understand and I think that the definition of democracy that appears in how to fix a constitutional democracy, the book written by Professor Ginsburg and Professor Hook, is an important definition since it is a definition of a liberal constitutional democracy. But that definition is not enough for institutions or instead of it for political context such as the one of Brazil or such as the one of South Africa or Colombia. In those cases, you need to build or rely on more substantive definitions of constitutions. And then what I thought is that the idea of constitutional identity would be important here. The target of an erosion process, of constitutional erosion process, is the constitutional identity of each political context. And it will differ from each other depending, of course, of the situations and the features and the characteristics of each constitutional identity we're talking about. And then what I try to do throughout the book, and then I'll try to cover it very quickly, so I will not to obey the time here, is to show what are the main features for me and especially the institutional features of Brazilian constitutionalism that were affected by this recent movement. I focus mainly from 2014 on, but I also go to 1988 and the movement of transition that for me, it was important in the sense of creating the way for the returning to politics in Brazil for the military. And then the discussion on transitional constitutionalism is truly important. The role of the Brazilian Federal Supreme Court in avoiding that we have more concrete measures of transitional justice. I try to analyze this in the first chapter to show that transitional justice and the transitional constitutionalism was something that should be more developed throughout our recent constitutional history. Then I discussed the idea of a social democratic constitutionalism, how neoliberal politics, they created hurdles for the application, the effectiveness of the way by which the 1988 Constitution defines something that I call a social democratic constitutionalism. So social economic rights that were truly important for effecting equality were by diverse governments seen as hurdles or something that should not be applied or effected in Brazil. And I also showed that we have something in comparison here with South Africa and the way by which they transitioned from an apartheid system without actually taking on the tasks of trying to address equality problems. The two other chapters, 3 and 4, discuss the role of the judiciary in Brazil, which is a role I think that is under researched by comparativists that try to analyze Brazil, in the sense that there is an important role from 2014 on of this branch in advancing constitutional erosion in Brazil. So I try to show in one chapter what is the institutional organization that gave rise to it, and in the other chapter how constitution making or constitutional decision making, and especially the way by which the Federal Supreme Court was very contradictory in its rulings, shaped and created a way for unstable constitutionalism under the 1988 Constitution. Further on, I discuss something that is truly important for the way by which we saw how to deal with political crisis here in Brazil, the concept of a moderating power, which is something that was built on the 1824 Constitution in Brazil, and it should die in 1891, but it didn't. It went on throughout our constitutional history to be part of the debate today on how to interpret the role of the Federal Supreme Court and the armed forces, instead of relying on citizenship as something important to decide political crisis. Then I discussed the role of the military and the militias, which were truly important for compromising the rule of law here in Brazil. And also how social media and what I try to depict as digital constitutionalism is something also important to be discussed nowadays in Brazil, and important that should be treated in constitutional law terms. I think that this is a general description of the book, and I think that I tried to cover some of the main topics of our discussion, but if not, I think that we'll have time to debate it. Thank you, Johanna.
Thank you very much, Emilio. So the other book that we are going to discuss today is on illiberal constitutionalism in Poland and Hungary, a deterioration of democracy, misuse of human rights, and the abuse of the rule of law. It's written by Tímea Drinóczi and Agnieska Bien-Kacála. Tímea Drinóczi is a professor at the Faculty of Law of the Federal University of Minas Gerais, Brazil, while Agnieska is a professor of law at the Nicolaus Copernicus University in Toruń, Poland. I would like to invite you now to give a short summary of your books. Tímea and Agnieska, please.
Thank you very much, Johanna. So very shortly, we started our research on illiberal constitutionalism in 2015. And already at that time, constitutional scholars tended to identify the results of Hungarian and Polish constitutional erosion as authoritarianism and modern authoritarianism. However, when you think about the last 11 and 6 years, you realize that the illiberalization process has been peaceful, gradual, and continuous in substantive constitutional democracies, and less severe than in those states like Turkey and Russia, with which scholars compare the Hungarian and Polish events. This contradiction increased our interest, and we assumed that we would better understand the changes if we considered some factors that had been neglected in different scholarships, studying Hungary and Poland. And these factors are regional context, which is the European Union and the Council of Europe, the peacefulness and gradualness of the liberalization process and its popular support, the constitutional identity of Poles and Hungarians, the possibility of disentangling liberalism and constitutionalism, which is something because of which we got many criticisms, because it seems to be an oxymoron for many of the scholars. And lastly, what we considered also is we had a look at different indexes and we compared them. And so I think that Agnieska would want to give us a definition about illiberal constitutionalism now.
Yes, thank you. So we did something different what Emilio did, and we introduced the new term and developed new concept of illiberal constitutionalism. In our view, illiberal constitutionalism is a stage in a process of authoritarianization of the EU member states, mainly in a post-socialist region that has been hit by autocrat populist leaders in the second decade of the 21st century. Illiberal constitutionalism is a result of the deterioration of constitutional democracy and the hollowing out of its components. The gradualness of the deterioration and embeddedness of the EU law and human rights commitments in a daily adjudication of law, regardless of their weaknesses and flaws, have kept these states from turning to modern authoritarianism. We proposed that the normative appeal of the regime for the population could find its roots more in an unbalanced constitutional identity that longs for a charismatic leader than in a particular political philosophy. This appeal could be satisfied by the application of a patchwork of ideologies, insofar as they can be invoked by a charismatic leader for pleasing the current emotional needs of the polity. And here, Tímea will continue.
Yes, thanks. So here we are. What you need for constitutionalism usually are constraints and stability, right? So the constraints, in our view, are built in the constitutional design and identity, both in Hungary and Poland. Constraints are the weakening, but still existing constraint power of the supranational and international communities. We describe this dynamic in connection with the abuse of the rule of law, deterioration of democracy, and misuse of human rights. We explore in the book the legal nature of illiberal legality when it is at odds and in compliance with the European rule of law, and illiberal democracy, we focus on electoral democracy and legislative processes. In the field of human rights, we briefly review the steps towards illiberalization, the visions that inform the populist autocrats, and the emerging concept in Hungary that assumes that the state could be a holder of fundamental rights. stability is provided for by 4 tactics. At least this is what we discovered. The first is the capturing of the constitution and constitutionalism. It happened in Hungary mostly formally and abusively, while in Poland it was done through informal unconstitutional constitutional amendments. The second tactic is the judicialization of politics. It resulted in the constitutionality of otherwise unconstitutional content, and that political intentions became law without resorting to a deliberative and democratic lawmaking process. It has also encouraged the abusive initiation practice of procedures before the Polish Constitutional Tribunal and brought about highly questionable rulings. Just think about the abortion decision and the latest ruling of the tribunal on the unconstitutionality of the Treaty of the European Union. The populist autocrat leaders of Hungary and Poland, while keeping all the benefits, pushed the limits of substantive constitutional democracy and EU membership. And apparently, the EU plays its role in it, more and more reluctantly, though, as we can see nowadays. Plausible defense mechanisms have also been rendered ineffective by Hungarian and Polish leaders, thus very little remained available that could assist in reversing illiberal constitutionalism. Unfortunately, we have finished our book with this negative and pessimistic tone, and we have not become more optimistic during the last couple of months. I hope that when we are now discussing maybe the possible remedies, we will get some hope from our discussants and from this discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Tímea and Agnieska. So now we are going to continue with our topics, with our distinct themes. So it's, I think, very, very interesting that just 15 or 20 years before, the constitutional landscape, at least among the relatively stable constitutional democracies, has been more homogeneous. And since then, we have been witnessing quite a sharp turn that some of these countries took. Some would say different, others would say contradictory narratives are being led by Hungary, by Poland, and by Brazil as well. So, as we have already heard, one of the greatest challenges of these books was to conceptualize in an adequate and authentic way what is exactly that we are talking about, maybe to invent or to polish the vocabulary and the concepts that we have been using or that we should be using in order to talk about effectively about these realities. So what was your own take? And now I'm turning to our discussants. What was your own take on these conceptual challenges before you read the book, and how the book and what you have found there actually helped you in order to understand and explain better these distinct realities, how these terms offered by our authors help you polish or justify the conceptual framework better than before, and also a final question here. Do you think that these two terms, illiberal constitutionalism and democratic or constitutional erosion, are actually the same thing? Are we kind of talking about the same thing, or is it distinct? So this round of questions, I'm first going to give the word to Antonia, please.
Thank you so much. Sorry for my voice. Thank you so much for this invitation. And indeed, reading this book has been really fascinating, because one of the first things that I was struck by is the fact that both books start with this methodological point. So claiming to adopting a specific terms in order to describe the case, the democratic backsliding in Brazil, Poland, and Hungary. Tímea and Agnieska theorize both the case of Hungary and Poland, as we have already heard from them, in the light of the concept of illiberal constitutionalism, which is very interesting conceptualization in between fully fledged democracy and classical authoritarian regimes. So they reject firmly the categorization of Hungary and Poland as modern authoritarian regime, or better, they acknowledge that the path taken by Hungary and Poland has not reached the point of transformation of the two cases in the authoritarian regime. I was struck by a claim that often has been made throughout the book, that this ultimately bond with the path of constitutionalism is due also, but during the book seems also mainly thanks to the membership of the European Union. So they are claiming that membership of the EU makes it possible to keep constitutionalism, and the actual legal remodeling, legislative and other legal action and political behaviors call for the label illiberal. So it seems that the membership to the European Union is the link between these apparently contradictory terms, constitutionalism and illiberal democracy. And so I would like to better understand this claim from the authors, because it is absolutely interesting, but we are also seeing that sometimes the membership to the European Union can be seen as one of the reaction, the causes of these anti-European sentiments in these countries, and so on and so forth. On the other side, the concept of constitutional erosion that is developed by Emilio tackled the idea that we are witnessing phenomenon that are not a clear break, single event in a constitutional path, but it is a prolonged situation in time, and as Emilio said, of different multiple political crises. And I can see that the two concepts has some elements in common. So the gradualness of the process, the role of constitutional identity. Both the books insist a lot on this concept of constitutional identity, and also on this point, I would like to engage a little bit more with the authors about the role of constitutional identity, because it can be a kind of ambivalent instrument in the hands of populist governance. The role of popular support, because both the books insist that these regimes are supported in a way by the popular vote, and also the fact that this phenomenon happened not only through constitutional amendment, but through legislative, political processes, or to silent constitutional amendment, so informal constitutional change. So I think that there are several elements that seems to point out that the two concepts may address very similar phenomena, even though, for example, the stress with regard to the link between Poland and Hungary to the European legal order and the importance of this bond for the definition of the liberal democracy may point in the opposite direction, to make liberal constitutionally distinct from a more encompassing, more general concept of constitutional erosion. I stop here. Now.
Thank you very much, Antonia. It was perfect. Now, without delay, I'm going to give the word to Mark. Please, Professor Geber.
Well, first, thank you very much for inviting me. One problem with this format is the traditional would begin with what I would like to begin with, and maybe take an extra 30 seconds. These are wonderful books. And we're sort of constrained in describing how wonderful they are, but they're important books, particularly for people like me who are not experts. As you read my biography, it's American politics, particularly American politics in the 19th century, something these books steadfastly refuse to discuss, remarkably. But they do wonderful things for teaching, and we're sort of more on the critique side earlier than we might want to be. And one way of getting into thinking is a little bit of an ambiguity in both books with respect to constitutional identity. So imagine Brazil decided what we really want is the Hungarian constitution in 1990. And they write that. And in practice, without any self-conscious change that we regard legitimate, it turns out to be the Polish constitution of 1990. Now, notice we might speak of the erosion of Brazilian constitutionalism, namely what they tried to do, they didn't do, but we might not speak of the erosion of constitutionalism in Brazil, because they would still have a constitutional democracy, just a different kind of constitutional democracy than they thought. And we would not speak of Brazil being an illiberal constitutional society, because all they did was change from one form of constitutional democracy to another. So if you don't like my examples, just pick two countries that are somewhat different and you think both are constitutional democracies, and imagine one morphs into the other without any conscious decision to morph into the other. So this suggests that erosion, if we want to make a distinction, erosion might deal with identity. Identities can change without a change, say, in the liberal, constitutional, or democratic score of a country. Whereas illiberal is clearly a change for the worse. And here we might play with both books and ask the question. Both books in some ways tell an erosion story. The beach, there's erosion. It's uniform. So in Hungary and Poland, it's not like the democratic part of Hungary is in really good shape. It's the liberal part that's collapsing. There are collapses in Brazil, Hungary, and Poland to the liberal elements, the constitutional elements, and the democratic elements. And I think this raises a question worth discussing. One, does it turn out they're interrelated? So as good theorists, we can all say what the distinction is, but if one starts eroding, if one starts becoming less liberal, the others will. Or can we imagine regimes that in fact junk the liberal or junk the democratic, but retain the other two elements in fairly decent range? That's all. I'm not sure how much time. Part of it is speak for several minutes. I didn't know what several minutes was. I thought, okay, this is about 2 or 3 minutes.
No, it's a very good sign, but no, you are completely on time. We are completely on time. So I am now, without delay, going to give the word to Tom, to Professor Ginsburg. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you for these two great books. And I also want to say that they really are great. And I think actually Mark Graeber is quite qualified to report on them, because one of the nice things about these books is they both take history seriously. In both of them, the 19th century is very much alive to this day. And so it is kind of, in some sense, Graeber historical institutionalist kind of approach, although not explicitly so. So our first question is about concepts. And I'll start with Emilio's book, which is deploying this concept of constitutional erosion. But I think what he's doing is stretching the application of the concept or testing the concept to see if it applies to a different context than the one that Huck and I were looking at. So Huck and I talk about the construct that we're looking at as, constitutional liberal democracy, all three of those words Mark just said. And what Emilio is saying, well, Brazil in 1988 wasn't trying to do that. It was trying to be a social democratic constitution. So then the question is, does the concept apply of constitutional erosion? And I think he shows that it certainly does. But also, he has, I think, elucidated some very interesting dynamics, which I won't talk about yet, about precisely how erosion unfolds when the goal is social democracy rather than just liberal democracy. So I think it's really a great contribution from that point of view. So I think quite successful in terms of concept application. Within the book, and maybe I'll come back to this, he emphasizes some concepts, neoliberalism and such. I'll just come back to those in a little bit. I think that it's basically quite successful concept addition to our conceptual vocabulary. The book on Hungary and Poland is a very different book, and I view it as a book about engaged in concept formation. It's taking two cases and kind of inductively, or maybe in a recursive way, looking at the conceptual words that have been deployed out there in the world already, looking at these two cases and seeing if those cases can help us refine our concepts. That's what I would say is the main project. And I think you guys do show that, I'm convinced that illiberal constitutionalism is an accurate description here. You frame it as a kind of transitional phase, although possibly a stable one. And that's interesting to me. And I guess a question is, what are the conditions under which we would expect to see it, these cases descend to true authoritarianism? I, like Antonia had the kind of a lingering suspicion that the European Union was not only one of the kind of restraining forces, but actually perhaps a point of leverage which allowed these countries to head down that path. And the reason I think that is because of the illiberalism side, that kind of sense where, these liberal European values, they really aren't ours. We are distinct. We are a nation state. You can criticize that without cost to some degree as you take over the political system. So it provided both leverage and also restraint in terms of how far they go. A good concept in the social sciences has some important features. So first of all, it should be empirically subject to empirical evaluation. And so then the question is, what other circumstances, or contemporary or historical, would this concept fit? You make a strong case that it doesn't apply to Turkey or Russia. Those are further down the road. But was there a point in Turkish history, perhaps, or, in contemporary Bolivia or something like that, where we would say, well, yeah, this actually is another case outside of your core two, which this applies. So that's kind of a question for you. What is how far can we extend this? Another important feature of concepts is that they be distinct from neighboring concepts. And you spend a lot of time going through all the different terms that have been used and deployed, and there are many terms. It's almost like each scholar has to come up with their own term to describe what's going on in Poland and Hungary. And again, I'm quite convinced you guys I'm convinced by your take, but I sort of, at the back of my mind, wonder what the other authors would say in debate. Would they say, well, no, this really is autocratic legalism and not illiberal constitutionalism, Kimley and Shapley. So that was kind of a lingering question. And again, it's important for the literature because we have to be able to deploy these things elsewhere, or at least identify which cases are in which category. So anyway, I think it's a project which is inviting a kind of rigorous definition of the different cases And it certainly pushes us along in terms of our conceptual architecture. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So we have been listening to various great comments and questions. I think now we are going to have 2 times 3 minutes that we can offer for the authors to comment and reply to these comments. This time, perhaps I will start with Tímea and Agnieska. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your comments and for reading the book and then just shared your thoughts about it. And I think that it is very difficult to answer here. Maybe I would start with the EU membership. I think that, yeah, I agree with that. So the question was how it is possible that the EU membership is the link here between constitutionalism and illiberal democracy. And my answer would be that, so to the question that why we think that it is a constraint or restraining power, the answer would be just imagine what would have happened without the EU membership. I think that the same thing would have happened just faster. And today we wouldn't talk about still going towards to authoritarianism, but we would talk about Hungary and Poland as a authoritarian state, because if you think about what is going on between the European Union and Hungary and Poland in terms of politics, and also this legal game they are playing, they are saying that we are doing this, and then comes some information from European Union, they back off. And so this we have been experiencing this game for years now. Now, one exception could be this judicial reform in Poland, so that could like challenge our concept of illiberal constitutionalism, which we are stating that it's a kind of transitional and it is stable at the same time, which is again a kind of oxymoron, isn't it? But if you think about it, it is how it is. We are transitioning to something else, to a worse state like authoritarianism, but we are still keeping this illiberal nature of the system in the sense that everything is eroding. Even, I mean, the liberal part is eroding, yes, faster or more seriously. The democratic part is not really, but it is eroding too. So what we try to do is try to see our systems as constitutional democracy. It has like 3 components: rule of law, democracy like electoral, more or less, and human rights. So, and what we observe is that there is a kind of erosion, deterioration, or illiberalization in each of these senses, in each of these components. And we try to give a new definition for them, because in the beginning, we felt that it cannot be that we are authoritarian state. We just in the 15, 16, we refused the idea that we are like Russia, that we are like Turkey. And that's why we started to look at the indexes to see what the data are showing to us. And that was a distinct data between like Hungary, Poland, and the other states. And I stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tímea. Now, Emilio, please, the floor is yours for the reply.
Okay, thank you, Johanna. Thank you, Antonia, Mark, and Tom, for such a deep reading of our books. Yes, I must agree with Antonia concerning the possibilities of comparison between the 2 ideas, and the fact that there is much of gradualness, some popular support, the definition of constitutional identity, and the fact that those processes, they go on throughout legal and political means instead of constitutional amendments. That is some of the recipes. I think that at least for Hungary, it works. It has been working a lot. I think that one of the things that I should have clarified in that introduction is the fact that the way by which I conceive of constitutional identity is a very tensioned way. I've been debating this idea with Tímea, and we are preparing a paper on it. But I think that it is not something that it is on one side clearly defined by a constitution, and on the other side, it is not something that it depends on partial identities inside some people or the people related to some political context. So I think that the very idea of constitutional identity is disputed by everyone that participates in a democratic constitutional system. And then what the 1988 Constitution did was to give some ideas or a track in which those narratives could be disputed. So some of the things that it defined is the way by which socio-economic issues should be addressed, or the way by which transitional matters should be treated through transitional justice. And then what I try to do in the books to show that some of those duties, they were forgotten throughout the 30 years and mainly in the past 6 or 7 years. Concerning what Mark just said, I have some difficulties, maybe because I studied. I would not say that in the right or in the best way, but I studied a lot in my initial days on academy, Habermas, and the idea that we should connect constitutionalism and democracy all the time. That those are concepts that they are complementary. And then I think that every time that we have something that endangers democratic features, or on the other side, constitutional features of a system, we have the whole system of constitutionalism being compromised. And I think that this is something that appears at VDEM for Brazil on the Liberal Democracy Index. Brazil returned from the numbers that it had on 1989 nowadays. So we can really see that it's not something that is part of the constitutional identity concept, but it's something that is more, let's say, the whole idea of constitutional identity has been compromised with those movements. And yes, Tom, what I said in the initial presentation, I didn't want to present or to introduce another concept. And then maybe what I try to do is to stress the idea that you and Aziz built. And I think that this could be important to understand what's going on in Brazil and the problem with other subjects that sometimes do not appear in general theory, like neoliberal threats. Thank you, Johanna.
Thank you very much, Emilio. So now we are going to move on to our next themes, which is going to be a little bit about those explanatory frameworks and those elements and aspects that actually explains and point at the motivations or the circumstances around these narratives, as well as a little bit about the contagious nature of these tendencies. So I think when Tom mentioned that these concepts and these new attempts to conceptualize illiberal constitutionalism and constitutional erosion, this has to be empirically validated, right? So I think this is in great harmony with perhaps both of the books, and at least the book of Tímea and Agnieska expressively take sides from a certain perspective when they are saying that this conceptualization had a lot to do with what reality has to say about what is going on in Hungary and in Poland, instead of implementing or trying to enforce abstract ideas, right? So on the one hand, we have these inductive versus deductive type of approach to the conceptualization. And the other thing would be, related to this, that many times in the academic discourse, we are talking about, in plural, always we say populist and authoritarian practices, tendencies, implicating in a way that there is a tendency, right, a growing trend towards the deterioration of constitutional standards. So would you agree that what these books are describing and conceptualizing are not only present in this pure, let's say, form in Hungary and Poland, in Brazil, but is there anything more essential or deeper in the core of these concepts that we can witness in other countries as well, that perhaps has to do with the same or very similar logic to keep the power through law? And now I think I'm going to open the floor, and this time, if you allow me, Mark, I'm going to give you the word.
Okay. Okay, that's a lot. And I gather 3 minutes. There's a wonderful scene in the American movie Excalibur, where King Arthur says, to Merlin, I believe we have defeated evil. And Merlin says, no, evil is always with us. And so in 1990, right, the end of history, we believe that we had defeated certain authoritarian tendencies. Witness Brazil, or witness Hungary, witness Poland. And one might say the greatest enemy of liberal constitutional democracy, of a more social constitutional democracy, is the belief that you have in fact defeated evil. That in fact, all we're now doing is fighting over whether it's going to be liberal constitutional democracy or social constitutional democracy or some form of government. We're fighting between forms of government that rank between the 98th and 100th percentile of good forms of government in human history. And we see this in the United States. We see this in Great Britain. You know, the idea that Donald Trump would be elected, the idea of Johnson being elected. And one of the features that the belief that you've defeated evil is its reduced mobilization. So in fact, the books talk about mobilization on the right, but one of the things the books note is the left quite frequently seems to expect other institutions to do the mobilizing. The EU will take care of the problem. The Brazilian Supreme Court will take care of the problem. We can trust the military to stay out of politics. What we are witnessing, and we actually witnessed it Tuesday in the United States, is the failure of forces committed to liberal constitutional democracy, socialist constitutional democracy, to mobilize and, more important, stay mobilized. So in fact, one of the things going on that the books talk about is there are forces that mobilize against Bolsonaro, against Orban, against PIS. They tend to win an election or two and then say, we've done it. Back, to our ordinary lives. And it may be Oscar Wilde was right. The problem with socialism is too many meetings. It's also the problem with certain academic departments. But the price of liberal or socialist constitutional democracy maybe too many meetings, because the evidence is that these books present is the other side is willing to have those meetings. And I guess our side has to have them as well. So I hope that answers your question. I'm not, at the end of the day, I was somewhat unsure what the question was, so I decided, okay, this will be as good enough as any.
Yes, that was a challenge as well, right?
Okay, and if other people say the right answer is 42, I know I've just answered the wrong question.
You know, I am favoring a lot the academic freedom of our speakers to speak up their minds freely and relate to the question as to the degree as they want. So well,
yeah, you know, I feel like the student. You know, have I responded to your questions?
Well, I think yes. I would say yes. So thank you very much, Mark. Please. Tom, would you mind continuing? Now the floor is yours.
Okay, my computer's very slow today. So the answer is 42. No, just kidding. I took your question, Johanna, to be like, how do we extend the application of these concepts outside the milieus in which the authors were writing? It's a great question. And I've been thinking a lot about it with regard to Brazil and the United States, which I think are very, very similar on one particular dimension. I'm writing on this a little, and I'd like to know Emilio's reaction. There are many multiracial democracies. You don't talk much about race in your book, but Brazil is a multiracial country, like the United States is a multiracial country. And I guess the question for you is that not a part of the story which explains the timing of this, erosion, the acceleration in erosion which you identify? That is, you have social democracy beginning to work, and there's somewhat of a backlash, affirmative action and things like this. Isn't that a part of the story? Isn't race part of the story? And could you say more about that? Of course, if you look around the world, multiracial democracy is possible. You have Germany, Israel, Canada, lots of countries. But multiracial democracy is really difficult in former slave societies like the United States and Brazil. And I feel like that's what binds our two countries, is our inability to deal with that aspect of the past, of our constitutional identity, if you will, that maybe is playing a role here. Emilio also emphasizes in his book the role of private violence, and I think that's super important and very important for us, again, in the United States to guard against. We have nascent forces that are mobilizing sort of, right now it's mobs of angry parents, but in a country with as many guns as we've got, it might be possible to mobilize actual private violence of the kind we see that has been carried out in Brazil with impunity for many decades. And so that's a warning, I think. Another society where we see that private violence is India, where the leading party does mobilize private gangs to intimidate its opponents. And so I think that's an important element that we have to look for in thinking about how to extend it. For Tímea and Agnieszka's book, I think that it's a question I had when I was reading through it. You guys focus very much on Hungary and Poland, but to really know if your concept is convincing, I then want to understand the Czech Republic and Romania, just to take two countries. That is, they're fairly similar. They're in the same part of the world. They've had relatively similar histories. Do they have different constitutional identities, right? Do they not have this legacy of victimhood and, they're all out to get me and that kind of thing? Are they viewed by their neighbors as lazy and all that stuff, And I think it's kind of important because that allows us to think about, how far your explanation goes. Maybe they've had different results because of just their interaction with the EU, but maybe it's something deeper, constitutional identity. So I think the comparative question, which is how I'm interpreting what Johanna asked us, is really important for you guys in terms of how far you can extend your concept empirically. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tom. I think just as you were speaking, I was thinking about that we have a lot to share, right? In Hungary, at least, that is what I can read in original language and not the Poland discourse, public discourse. But we have been struggling actually a lot with unearth these deep structural historical heritage and social heritage that we are still fighting with. And so I think that this would be really great to see in the future more. Sorry for this little intermission. So now I am going to offer the word to Antonia, please.
Yes, thank you, Johanna. I'm following the comments of Tom because I also was thinking about applying the concept developed by Tímea and Agnieska to other mainly Eastern European countries that are experiencing a similar path through illiberal constitutionalism. And I'm particularly happy about the question by Johanna, because I was also thinking whether your concept would be can be applied also, for example, to Serbia or North Macedonia. We know that they are countries in the process to dealing with the accession. So they are candidate countries. So there lack that link with the European Union legal order. So it would be interesting to test this concept to countries that are experiencing a similar path, but they are not within the EU legal order, but they are in the process of entering the EU. At least they are bargaining the entrance on the with the European Union. And it also, this is linked to another comment that I had reading your book, because so you rely a lot on the history, the tradition, the sociological roots of some aspects of the identity, historical identity, both of Hungary and Poland. A thing that I think is missing is to look at that specific moment of the accession of Hungary and Poland to the European Union, because some scholars argue that that moment happened just formally, so without a real constitutional moment. So the people were not really engaged, involved with embracing the EU values. So I think that moment probably need further inquiries, because according to this narrative, for example, Sayo is one of the most prominent scholars looking at that specific moment as one of the possible roots of the consequences, of the liberal consequences we are witnessing. So I think that looking at that specific lack of constitutional moment in the sense of popular adhesion, popular commitment to the European values is worth looking at.
Thank you very much, Antonia. So now I am going to give the words to the authors. And so this time, Emilio, please, if you could start.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the questions. Again, Mark, I was hearing you and thinking about the case in Brazil for that concept that I just mentioned right at my presentation, the idea of a moderating power. This concept was introduced in the 1824 Constitution as something that belonged to the former emperor. And I think that it remained in our constitutional history mainly because of the idea of an elitist democracy that should take place in Brazil. So the sense that elitism plays, or elites play a very important role in democracy in Brazil is still in place. And then not only political scientists and jurists keep remembering this idea of a moderating power that should be managed by the Federal Supreme Court or the military in order to avoid chaos in political crisis or chaos in political situations. And that is one idea that keeps keeping the people out of the conversation. So what I think is that the 1988 Constitution clearly went on a path that is truly different from this elitist conception of democracy, but we are still in the process of advancing it, of making it real and avoiding that something like this, like the militarization of politics that took place from 2016 on, could turn back. But it went back. And I think that it went back right on the time that Tom was mentioning, when we were talking about more people to be included in social practices, more people to be included in politics as a whole, and a kind of more liberating society, which is something that the 1980 Constitution encompasses, in my view, a lot. I think that there are several provisions in the constitutions that point in this direction. When we have those people be included in social security programs or less people in poverty, of course, there is a reaction from the most conservative fringes of society. And then I always remember Karen Stanley and the idea that we have at least something like 20 or 30% of authoritarian persona in each country. And this goes for the research that she did in the European Union and the US. But I think that we had something like this in Brazil, because it is something like this, 25%, which still today support Bolsonaro and share this idea that we should not work against something that a Brazilian scholar named Silvio Almeida called structural racism. So racism is truly something that Brazil and the US shares a lot. And in our case, maybe not in the case or in the same interpretation, the US forms this authoritarian persona. Finally, and very quickly, the idea of private violence. It is interesting that because what I try to describe in the book, talking about what we call here in Brazil militias, which is not the same that you have in the US as militias, because what we call here the militias are former policemen from what we have here as a civil police or military police, or even members of the armed forces that go to work as members of death squads, and then they gain some kind of respect from the population, most of them authoritarian people, which see them as a solution for drug trafficking or drug dealers and so on. So what Brazil has been accepting as a solution for this problem has gained also space in political processes. I don't know if I covered everything that we talked about.
Thank you very much, Emilio. Yes, so now I am giving the floor to Agnieska and Tímea. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for those questions. Well, the answer again is not easy, but we decided with Tímea address not easy situation, questions, issues. So I could say that now the evil is back, or even I could say that evil was always with us, or it is in us. So it is about values, people and values. And here we see what we discover with Tímea, that our populations has inside both liberal and illiberal values. So we decided to use this unbalanced constitutional identity construct, and we noticed that depending on the situation and a certain period of historical development, liberal or illiberal values prevails. And yes, as for European Union, I could say that, yeah, European Union cannot save us because of these values. And we speak different languages. There are two different worldviews. As for Poland, I could say that, and I am sure that Tímea agree with me, that consensus and dialogue that is very important for European Union is totally differently perceived by Poles. For European Union, very important is equality and discussion to achieve kind of consensus and resign from maybe a little bit. But for us, for people in Poland and Hungary, what we understand hierarchy, and we want to force our worldview. So this is why we cannot communicate, in fact. And this is what we see in Poland in relation to judiciary. For candidate states and also in connection to Polish and Hungarian accession to the European Union, I could say that it was, yes, formally good procedures or informal terms, it was achieved. But if we think about values, we can see that it was not implemented by our governments or people who could do this, and the populations is not or didn't adjust those values, liberal values. For Czech Republic and Romania, or the whole region, I think that it is a very important question, but it needs some more research. So it could be a whole new project to check how far they are in the illiberalization and how they perceive those values, yes, liberal and illiberal values. Thank you. I think that I addressed more or less any issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnieska. I don't know if Tímea would like to add something.
Thank you. Yes, I thought that I wanted to add, but now I don't really. Maybe if I'm just like talking. Yeah, actually, we had the project about Hungary and Poland, and I'm Hungarian, Agnieska is Polish. So we thought that we understand what is going on. We understand our values, we understand our history, and we can give a more accurate account of that. And we can link it to this deterioration which we have been experiencing. And at that moment, we decided to study Poland and Hungary, obviously. And throughout our project, we felt the need to try to expand it to the region, because I mean we share like similar history, so that we could like assume that we share similar like emotional traits and expectations and values as well. But simply at this point, we couldn't do more than we did in the book. But we considering to expand our research and maybe to test whether our concept is actually a viable concept in a comparative perspective. And that would be, and also I think that what could be used, or what we will use if we do this research, we would use our approach like historical trajectory, emotional trajectory, and value orientation of the people are essential for us to understand illiberalization and understand why populist leaders or autocratic leaders are there for a certain period of time, and after that they are not liked any longer, and after that again And so we wanted to give something which is like beyond the usual investigation of party politics and role of opposition and the things like that. Thank you. And sorry for abusing my time.
No, thank you very much, Tímea. So, well, now, referring back to actually what you, Tímea, said in the very beginning about optimistic outcomes, in order to give a chance to have an optimistic ending, at least in this event, we are going to talk a little bit about remedies and responsibility of the academic community facing these type of situations. So both books actually dedicate space to different institutional or extra-institutional solutions. The book of Tímea and Agnieska mentions militant democracy, multi-tiered amendment designs, unconstitutional, constitutional amendments, the judicial power, but also they mention some aspects that are not strictly legal, such as like the information revolution or improving the education of citizens. Also, the book of Emilio mentions different institutional solutions that actually are already present in the current Brazilian constitution, such as the impeachment process, the action of the National Congress and governors in the federal system, finally the Federal Supreme Court and their possibilities to fight back. So, what kind of solutions do you see possible or workable based on the insights of the book in order to improve rule of law and democracy in these and other countries? And do you think that there is actually a tension in between legal formal institutional solutions or legal design as solutions versus the bettering of extra legal aspects, such as the education of the society, or do you think that there is a tension or division that lies in a different place? And also related to this, how do you see exactly the responsibility of academics, legal scholars in these countries, but also outside of these countries? How does these challenges impact the nature of academic work, teaching, publication, publishing, or even intervention in public discourse? Again, a lot of questions, but in order to guarantee your freedom to pick the one that you would like to answer, and this time I would like to give the floor first to Tom. Please, the floor is yours.
So that's a lot of questions. I mean, one thing I think academics can do and need to do is to talk more about academic freedom, which, you both have documented. I think that has been under attack in both jurisdictions, in all these jurisdictions. It's under attack in the United States, and it's under attack not just from politicians and funders, but from the society itself. And we have to name that, and we have to cooperate and collaborate and support each other across borders, I believe. There's another issue which I'm picking up actually on a question that Thomas Bustamante asked in the chat, in case we don't, which he may get to ask, or we might ask for him. But one of the things he points out is there's a resurgence in anti-corruption rhetoric, and in preparation for the election in Brazil. And I think anti-corruption rhetoric is actually a good thing, and we need to focus on it. Obviously, you make the case, Emilio, that it was abused in the case of the car wash scandal, particularly with regard to the two leaders, Lula and Dilma. On the other hand, I think us academics do no one a service by pretending that the PT was not a very corrupt party, and is not perhaps a very corrupt party. And this is just my own experience, my limited experience in Brazil. People talked about this well before these scandals arose. We have to demand clean governance from all sides, even because otherwise the politics of anti-corruption are susceptible to partisan manipulation. Clearly, a program of global anti-corruption, would be very helpful in the case of Hungary. which is obviously extremely corrupt regime. I think, what is it? The second richest man is Orban's, high school friend or, junior high school friend. So, I think corruption is something that is a central issue for all democracies, and we're going to have to get around it and not pretend that it's only one side.
Thank you very much. Please, Antonia, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. So there are a lot of questions. So the first one about the possible remedies. So of course, there are institutional remedies that should be seen at institutional level, like, for example, the response of the European Union vis-à-vis the threat posed by Poland and Hungary to the European values. But as Emilio clearly points out in the book, constitutional resilience, I really like this concept of constitutional resilience, cannot be given only in the end of constitutional design. So constitutional design can work, but there need to be some condition around the institutional aspects. For example, an engaged civil society or free media or academic freedom. So I think that we should look not only at the legal response, at the institutional response, but also at the conditions in which legal rules can work better. And on this specific aspect, of course, empowering civil society and sustain civil society in those countries is key. The recent reaction with regard to the Polish decision on EU law primacy in Poland has seen a huge civic mobilization. So this is in favor of the European Union, and it is, I think this is a good sign for this civil society engagement also with the respect of the European values. On the side of academic, the academic role, what I'm experiencing is that, of course, we need to talk and study rigorously more this phenomenon. So one thing that I'm learning, studying a related aspect of this rule of law crisis, the use of conditionality, is that we need really to engage in serious, rigorous studies to further grasp the roots of this phenomena. And also, on a more personal side, I think we should help our colleagues, students, researchers that are experiencing attack on their academic freedom. So I can recall the case of Conrado Hübner. So I didn't know this professor, but when I received the letter to be signed in favor of his freedom, his academic freedom, I had no doubt in signing in and joining the Brazilian community of professors in support of him. So I think we have many chances to make our work meaningful in fighting these illiberal turns. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Antonia. And now, please, Mark, the floor is yours.
Okay, seems rather weird on Zoom to say the floor is yours, but we need new expressions. We need new ways of selling the academy. The golden age of the academy is over. Relying on the rhetorics that support the academy in the 1950s are failing. We need to explain to a different population why the deliberative life has some value. We need to rethink what Tom calls clean government. Here is my grandmother's version of clean government. When I vote for the crook, lots of bad things happen on City Hall, but I'm guaranteed a turkey for the holidays. Clean government meant, yeah, the contractors are clean, but I don't get a turkey. The simple matter is we go, boo, hiss, isn't that corruption when Poland raises pensions to a certain group of people who can be trusted, when Orban raises pensions. But these are people who have given up on government. That in some ways, for Donald Trump in the United States, my basic thesis was, well, you didn't think Trump was going to do much for you, but Trump was going to hit in the stomach the politicians you really hated. So in addition to clean government, we need to think about effective government, and some are maybe rethinking. So I think the most hated people in the academy are not the right-wingers, they're our academic bureaucrats who just, I mean, one of the things, we have a standard thing saying, our goal is to make the university bureaucracy have only a small negative effect on what we do. The idea that they might help us is out of the order. But then, when we talk about everybody else's regulation, we assume their bureaucracies are much better than our bureaucracies. Our bureaucracies are about red tape, theirs are about efficiency. I think we need to understand, and this is something saying, better the lives of those who have revolted against liberalism, those who have revolted against socialism. We will see racism. We will see sexism. We will see all the isms we detest, but we'll also see other things. And one of the most interesting findings is it turns out that a lot of right-wing populists in different incarnations were more on the radical left. That people have different buttons, and what we're doing isn't hitting the buttons of a lot of people that could move them in different ways. And that's one of the things I think we need to study is identities, not treating identities as fixed. And the real challenge, and I think these books do a wonderful job. I had something in reading Tímea and Agnieska, I had this great sense of don't get lost in Hungary. Because the person I'm going to run into is just going to be grumpy, this, that, and the other thing. By the way, your book is being banned by the Tourist Bureau, if you read it. But we need to understand their identities, understand that all constitutions are imposed constitutions on lots of people, and how our constitutions can capture what we think are the weaknesses of some of our populations, but also build on their strengths and capture an older notion of constitution that James Madison had. He said a constitution can build strength for a certain set of ideas. We think of constitutions not as limits, but and not as a fixed identity, but as something that can help identity formation along with other kinds of institutions. And I think, Emilio, I think your book is really good on the Brazilian Constitution as an attempt to form an identity and all the problems that result.
Thank you very much, Mark. So now we are going to have the last response session by the authors. And this time again, I would like to give the screen and the microphone to Tímea and Agnieska, please.
Thank you. I have some points. We have to talk more about academic freedom. That is right. in Hungary, I taught constitutional law, and we had one lecture about academic freedom. So I was like talking about academic freedom like once a year or once in 2 years, depending on when I had my class on that. And in this year, I had already had like a couple of speeches about academic freedom and how the Hungarian academic freedom is under attack. And I'm going to participate in a conference about academic freedom next week. So it is, yes, it is very important to talk about academic freedom and new ways, as Mark said. And we have already been talking about what new ways could be. And there was this idea that maybe scholars need to translate their scholarly ideas to the everyday, the language of everyday people, and use social media.
I think Tímea's microphone and screen does not have the floor anymore. Well, Agnieska, perhaps would you like to step in with the answer that you wanted to say, and then we can give the word back to Tímea. Sorry for my notes.
Yes, thank you. Yes, Tímea was talking about the importance of the academic freedom, and indeed we are working on some new things and projects on that. But I want to add something in connection with the values. Because when we are speaking about, or when we speak about academic freedom, we have to bear in mind that usually institutions like university are built in hierarchical structure. And for Poland, it is really harmful, and we see it, yes, it's daily practice. Sometimes the problem is connected with loyalty, but it is not loyalty, but it is connected with subordination that violates freedom, academic freedom. And I want to give you one example from, yes, my situation and my university. And indeed it is like that, because I had some issues connected with advertising this event even. And I feel that the situation harmed my academic freedom. And well, I want to stop here to not go into emotional, and I think that Tímea is with us and can tell something more. Thank you.
Thank you, Agnieska. So Tímea, I'm going
sorry, something happened with my internet. Sorry for that. So I just skip what I wanted to say, and I'm just saying something else. Antonia, you said very important things about engaging civil society, media, academic freedom, and so on and so forth. And that we have to sign letters, and then that is a good thing that civil society is being mobilized in Poland. They went to street against the abortion decision. Now we read how judges are reacting to the attacks. But can I ask you, or ask us, what will be the result of this mobilization? Is there a result at all? Could they have achieved anything in the last couple of years? Because it is nice that we are talking about, yes, let us empower, let us talk, but isn't it just like a naive attempt to assure us that we are doing something? And if it is, what actually can we do? And then I hope that you were, I were with you when I was like talking about this, educating the people through social media as the one role of scholars. Maybe it could help, I don't know. And because we were like, with Agnieska, we were thinking through of the options, and we just couldn't find anything which actually can help, which is not like naive, right? And this is why we are really pessimistic. And why we are again pessimistic? Unbalanced constitutional identity. I talk about what I wanted to talk about. So Thomas Bustamante asked this question to which Tom already answered a little bit. So illiberalism, can it outlive or not? What happens in Hungary if the opposition will win the election? Everybody is like, yes, there is a chance, good. And illiberalism is over, we defeat the devil again. But will it be like this, really? Have you been listening to the options what the opposition is offering to get rid of the Orbán regime? Are those options like rule of law compatible options? I give you one example. Now it is in the discussion that the fundamental law, the Illiberal Constitution of Hungary, should be withdrawn by a simple majority in the parliament. Yeah. So, and then it seems that they are like actually considering this, right? And this is what we tried to explain in the book, this ambivalence of being Hungarian or living in Hungary nowadays, right? And I think that the same applies to Poland from a slightly different perspective. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tímea, and forgive me in advance, but I cannot help just inserting one comment that this discussion reminds me of these one of these blog posts of András Jakab about arriving to a chess game with a hammer, right? So the chess game is supposed to be the conceptual doctrinal elaboration of concepts and application interpretation in line with the strict conceptual limits and so on. And the hammer, of course, is cleaning the table and just do what you in fact want to. And what Tímea is referring to about the appearance of the new opposition is actually, I would say, when both parties arrive with the hammer to the chess game, right? So no one actually wants to play chess. And so what is that we're supposed to do in this situation? But one more thing, do we think that when our actions do not have a direct consequence, is that idealism really? Okay, I'm going to stop here and give the word to Emilio. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Firstly, let me just mention, actually, that was Thomas' a question, and then Tom added some things on it. The discourse on the anti-corruption rhetoric in politics in Brazil, they go at least, let's say, 19 to 1910s or something like that, when this kind of dispute was the main dispute in which each of the candidates for the presidency or for other positions in the political system kept on accusing the other of being corrupt, which is something that takes place in all over the world. But the thing is that throughout the 1988 Constitution, we had some things that were important to consider. I think that the car wash operation was important for one thing. It showed how financing political campaigns in Brazil can be very corrupted. This is the main thing that we can obtain from the car wash operation. The other results, some of them were important to show how bids take place and how great or big companies, they receive contracts from our public companies and from the union and so on. But the results for the rule of law, they were very harmful. If we take it and we consider the World Justice Project, rule of law did not improve it in the past years in Brazil. It only got worse. And I think that this is connected with the way by which people, or actually authorities, associate some politicians, some parties, and some politics with this fight against corruption. Of course, corruption is something really important, and it was something important during the PT's government. Our federal police, for instance, was truly strengthened only when we started in 2013 the Lula's government. But corruption was a problem, effectively, But I think that there is this idea by which you can quickly and easily associate some politics and some ways of doing politics with corruption, and this can have some very bad results. Think, for instance, that there are several accusations against Bolsonaro that are made by the media on corruption scandals, things that involve the way by which his public servants share their salaries with Bolsonaro's sons, and even with Jair Bolsonaro when he was a federal representative. None of this went advanced as investigations because Bolsonaro was quickly in capturing the federal police, in capturing the prosecutor general of the Republican people who could investigate him. Concerning academic freedom, yes, I don't have what to disagree here. I remember the case of Conrado, our colleague from the University of São Paulo, who is still facing a criminal procedure that was launched both by the Federal Supreme Court Justice and the Prosecutor General of the Republic. So I think that we need to think and be creative, both in the sense of trying to attract people to universities and academy. I have colleagues that say that they prefer to do not put their children on universities because there are other options of professions that don't depend on universities, or the knowledge that is taught in universities is not the best one or the proper one. So we see that we have huge challenges, and considering academic freedom, this is something that it is important also for Brazil. We have challenges here now, and I don't think that I must agree with Tímea and something that Thomas asked, that illiberalism or authoritarianism or the process of constitutional erosion will go on even if we have a change in commanding politics in the federal union or the presidency here in Brazil. I think that it is something that was built before those governments, and it can endure, as we can see, I think, in the movements that support Trump still in the US. That's it, Johanna.
Thank you very much, Emilio. So now we are a little bit behind our schedule. So I am going to ask the following questions in order to open the floor to the Q&A session. So from YouTube, they are asking from Professor Emilio if, following his view, democratic erosion would be a more profound phenomenon than constitutional erosion. Emilio, could you go on answering this, and then we are going to proceed to the last question.
Okay, quickly. I think that there are different concepts, as our discussion with Professor Thomas was trying to show. I think that democratic erosion is concerned with a very important but a basic definition of liberal democracy, which is truly important for other countries in the world. Actually, for Brazil, I think that we can consider that the rule of law is perfectly in danger here also. But what I try to do is to show that we could take into account other more substantive definitions of constitutional democracy when talking about constitutional erosion.
Thank you very much. And so here I would suggest proceeding with the other question of Thomas Bustamante. I don't know, Thomas, if I may, if you would like to maybe reframe or put the question forward in live, and then we can close.
Oh, thank you. I wasn't expecting to go on the screen now, but yeah, I think that the question has already been answered, and I think that the book shows something that is important to say, is that this process, Bolsonaro was always there. I mean, he has been a politician for 30 years, but what made him an alternative, what made him viable, was a process and a rhetoric that was slowly cooking for a huge number of years. And I am a bit skeptical about how our elites, the media, the main companies, the judiciary, and all these institutions would respond if Bolsonaro was a bit more polite, if he would behave in the meetings of the United Nations, if we had a more sustainable environmental policy, and if he were more effective in response to the COVID, but kept all the rest. And I think that the candidates that are presenting themselves, especially those associated with the car wash operations, which were the guys who brought Bolsonaro to the screen to become an alternative, they are like that. Many people will welcome them. Many people with, I don't know, with less explicit hate, they would recommend these guys, and they would fully support what would be, in my judgment, just as bad in terms of institutional reforms, in terms of violations of the rule of law and similar attitudes. So that's my concern, that we have a cleaner version of Bolsonaro that may be more effective. So thank you for letting me come in. And I would like just to congratulate the two books, the authors, which was really amazing. I'm very proud of being a colleague of Emilio and Tímea.
Thank you very much, Thomas. And yes, I think that we can reformulate this question to everyone about whether with a different rhetoric, but maintaining and continuing with the same content, how this whole issue would be perceived and conceptualized. And sorry, just one correction. I really feel impelled to give the floor very quickly to Prof. Singh, sorry for my pronunciation, in order to have his question. Actually was the first one who commented and asked this question, and I do not want to miss the opportunity. Please, the microphone is yours and the screen as well. Or I can equally read the question, which goes as follows. Does constitutional erosion means moving away from global values in the national legislation? And so if anyone would like to volunteer to answer this question and or react to what Professor Bustamante Thomas just, okay, he's saying that I'm not able to unmute himself or herself, I'm sorry. Then it was okay that I read the question. So please, if anyone would like to volunteer to have a comment on the last two questions.
Quickly, Johanna, as he was asking about constitutional erosion, I think that it is this, but it is more than that. I think that the idea that constitutional erosion is attached to constitutional identity, something that endangers or harms constitutional identity, tries to show that both liberal or traditional, or what we can call global values of constitutional democracy, when they are in danger, as also all other values that are important to each constitutional identity, they are part of the process of constitutional erosion. And just a comment, a follow-up on what Thomas was just talking. I think that maybe the chances for a candidate that was brought directly by the car wash operation is that we have more chances for a more sophisticated way of deteriorating Brazilian democracy in the next few years. So I'm very doubtful towards these guys from car wash operation, since what they all have done in the light of day concerning several of the procedures of criminal responsibility in those cases. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So sorry for this, but it seems that we need to unmute Prof. Singh. I don't know if any of you, Tímea or Emilio, could do that.
Maybe Emilio.
I think that he can do it for himself. It seems to me that
I would say, but I was asked to.
Either Emilio or Tímea can do it. They're the host and co-host.
Yeah, but he's unmuted actually. Let me check it.
No, he is muted. Is that okay? Now,
Oh, it does,
I'm sorry, I cannot.
I don't think it depends on us. I think that depends on him, actually. But I try to do it, it's not working.
Well,
so,
yeah, Tímea.
Very quickly answering that question, yes, yes, it has an impact in national legislation, because now national legislation is used as an instrument to further destroy global values. And as to Thomas Bustamante, thank you, Thomas. And it is my pleasure to be your colleagues. And I've already learned a lot from you, both of you and my other colleagues here at the UFMG. And I'm really proud that I can be a team player with you in organizing the seminar series, for instance, and this is just one example of what I've been doing together with Emilio and also with Thomas, even though now he is not in Brazil. And now I also, I mean, I'm feeling that this is the end, so I need to thank Agnieska, your your friendship and that for all these years we've been working together, and all the other years we will be working together. And I really appreciate Johanna and Mark and Tom and Antonia for their being here with us and reading our book and books and I don't know, dedicated some time for thinking about it and sharing their views about the book. It means a lot to us. So thank you very much.
I will join quickly, Tímea. Thank you so much for joining us today. All of you, Professor Graeber, Professor Ginsburg, Professor Antonia, and also Professor Johanna, but also everyone who's joining us here. Thomas, our colleague here, which is a friend from years, and actually played a lot of influence in our work. So thank you so much. This is a very special moment for all of us.
Thank you very much. Yes, everyone was great, and I'm very thankful that you did not have me intervene any of your speeches or presentations and interventions. So I really enjoyed that, and I think we will continue this rigorous and honest reflection on these matters, contemporary matters on constitutional democracy. We will continue and hopefully see you very soon in another event. Thank you very much. Goodbye, everyone.